On a stormy night, a young man with nothing but determination stopped to help a stranded stranger, unaware that his kindness would spark a life-changing chain of events. From fixing a flat tire to meeting an influential figure, his journey is a testament to how small acts of goodness can ripple into extraordinary opportunities. What happens next will leave you speechless. Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an update. The night was anything but calm. Dark clouds rolled across the skies over Austin, Texas, and a sudden downpour drenched the quiet suburban streets. The rhythmic drumming of rain on car hoods filled the air, interrupted occasionally by the swoosh of speeding vehicles. For most people, it was a night to stay indoors, safe and dry. But not for Margaret Bronson. Margaret, a retired teacher in her late 60s, found herself stranded on the side of a desolate road. Her Tesla Cybertruck, a sleek futuristic vehicle, sat at an awkward tilt, its rear tire completely flat. The normally composed Margaret now paced in frustration, gripping her umbrella as cold rainwater splashed around her expensive leather shoes. She glanced at her phone, debating whether to call for help, but something stopped her. Traffic roared past, headlights illuminating her rain-soaked figure for fleeting moments before disappearing into the night. No one stopped. Margaret sighed heavily, her breath forming visible puffs in the cool night air. She wasn't accustomed to feeling helpless. She had always been the problem solver, the fixer, the one people relied on. Tonight, though, the tables had turned. Just as Margaret began scrolling through her contacts, a faint silhouette emerged in the distance. Pedaling through the storm was Jordan Hale, a young man of 20, his drenched hoodie clinging to his shoulders and the sound of his bicycle chain clicking against the storm's chaos. Jordan had just finished a grueling shift washing dishes at a nearby diner. His body ached from hours of standing, his fingers pruned from hot water and soap. His path home was familiar, yet tonight it was filled with hurdles. The storm, the icy wind cutting through his clothes, and his exhaustion pressing down on him like a weight. He could hardly think of anything but the promise of a warm meal and his bed. But as he neared the roadside, the sight of Margaret's stranded Cybertruck forced him to slow down. His tired eyes quickly took in the scene. The flat tire, the rain-drenched elderly woman pacing, the luxury vehicle that seemed oddly out of place. He could have kept riding. No one would blame him. Yet something inside him whispered otherwise. Jordan hesitated, his mind wrestling with conflicting thoughts. What if she didn't want help? What if she thought he was trying to take advantage of her? But then, his mother's voice echoed in his mind. Even when life feels heavy, kindness keeps you light. He pulled his bicycle to the side of the road, brushing rain from his face with a trembling hand. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he called out, his voice cutting through the downpour. Margaret turned, startled. For a moment she hesitated, taking in the young man before her, a stranger with tired eyes but an open, reassuring expression. She clutched her umbrella tighter but nodded. "I have a flat tire," she said, raising her voice over the rain. "I was about to call for help, but—" Her words trailed off. Jordan stepped closer, still cautious but determined. "I can take a look if you'd like," he offered, his tone calm and steady despite the cold rain dripping down his face. Margaret tilted her head slightly, considering him. The young man was soaked, clearly exhausted, but there was something earnest in his demeanor. She nodded. "That would be kind of you." Jordan propped his bicycle against a nearby lamppost and knelt beside the Cybertruck's flat tire. It was unlike anything he had ever worked on. His experience fixing old bikes and appliances paled in comparison to this advanced piece of machinery, yet he didn't let doubt creep in. "Let's see what we've got here," he muttered, his hands already at work. Margaret hovered nearby, watching with curiosity. "You seem to know what you're doing," she said after a moment, her voice softening. Jordan chuckled lightly. "I've patched enough tires to have an idea, ma'am," he replied, shaking water from his hands. "This one's a bit fancier, though." As he worked, the two began to talk. Margaret asked about his life, and Jordan, hesitant at first, eventually opened up. He shared bits of his story, His part-time jobs, his mother working long shifts as a nurse, his younger sister who looked up to him, and his dream of becoming an engineer someday. Margaret listened intently, her heart aching at his struggles but admiring his resilience. Here was a young man who, despite having every reason to be bitter or self-centered, chose instead to stop and help a stranger. Finally, after some effort, Jordan stood and wiped his hands on his jeans. "There you go, ma'am. It's patched enough to get you home, but you should have it checked properly tomorrow," he said, gesturing toward the tire. Margaret offered him money, but Jordan shook his head with a polite smile. "Thank you, but I didn't do it for the money," he said simply. Margaret's eyes softened. "You're a remarkable young man," she said. "The world could use more people like you." Jordan nodded slightly, turning to retrieve his bicycle. "Take care, ma'am," he said before pedaling away, his silhouette fading into the rainy night. Margaret watched him disappear, her heart heavy with emotion. For the first time in years, she felt inspired, not by wealth, success, or ambition, but by the pure, unshakable goodness of a stranger. The rain continued to pour as Jordan pedaled away into the night, his heart feeling lighter despite his soaked clothes and aching body. Margaret stood by her now patched Cybertruck, still holding her umbrella, watching him fade into the stormy distance. She couldn't shake the image of the young man, his humility, his quiet strength, and the way he had refused payment for his kindness. It was rare, she thought, to meet someone who gave so freely, expecting nothing in return. Jordan, meanwhile, rode on, his thoughts swirling as fast as the rain around him. He tried not to dwell on the encounter too much. For him, helping the stranded woman was the natural thing to do, just as his mother had always taught him. But even as he cycled toward his modest neighborhood, a faint smile crept onto his face. He hadn't done much, but it felt good to have helped someone. As the familiar streets of his neighborhood came into view, the storm showed no sign of letting up. The narrow road was dimly lit, and the sound of his squeaky bicycle chain echoed against the rows of small, weather-worn homes. He slowed down near the corner where his house sat, the porch light flickering faintly, a reminder of how tight money was. His mother often delayed fixing small things like that to prioritize necessities. He parked his bike against the fence and took a moment under the porch awning, wiping the rain from his face with his sleeve. Inside, the faint sound of his sister Emma's laughter brought him a brief sense of comfort. At least she still had her childhood joys, he thought. Opening the door, Jordan stepped into the warmth of their small living room. His mother, Lisa Hale, was seated at the kitchen table, her nurse's scrubs damp with sweat from a double shift. She looked up with a tired but gentle smile. "Late night?" she asked softly, her voice carrying the weight of years of sacrifices. Jordan nodded. "Had to help someone with a flat tire," he said, brushing off the experience as though it were nothing. Lisa tilted her head slightly, studying her son. She saw through his modesty, always doing more than he let on, always putting others first. "Good on you," she said, her words carrying both pride and a touch of worry. She wished life would give her son a break. Jordan placed his wet jacket on the back of a chair and joined his mother at the table. For a moment they sat in silence, the storm outside filling the gaps with its rhythmic drumming. "You've got a big heart, Jordan," Lisa finally said, her eyes filled with an unspoken gratitude. "Don't let this world take that from you." Jordan offered a faint smile in return, but deep down, a part of him wondered if kindness alone would ever be enough to change his circumstances. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the streets glistening under the pale light of dawn. Jordan's routine resumed as usual. Early morning chores, a shift at the diner, and another evening spent fixing bikes and appliances for neighbors. His days blurred together in a cycle of hard work and quiet dreams of something more. He didn't dare linger too long on those dreams. They often felt like luxuries he couldn't afford. But Margaret's night had been anything but ordinary. After arriving home safely, she couldn't stop thinking about the young man who had helped her. She replayed the encounter in her mind, the sincerity in his voice, the way he spoke about his family, and his refusal to accept payment. It was as though fate had placed him on that rainy road for a reason. That morning, as she sipped her coffee, Margaret picked up her phone and dialed a familiar number. On the other end of the line was her son, Gabriel Bronson, the renowned tech entrepreneur known for his groundbreaking innovations. Though their relationship was close, Margaret rarely called him about personal matters, but this felt different. "Mom, good morning," Gabriel greeted warmly, his voice chipper despite the early hour. "How was your trip back last night?" "Oh, Gabriel, I have a story for you," Margaret began, her tone light but filled with emotion. She recounted the events of the previous night in vivid detail, from the stranded Cybertruck to Jordan's unwavering kindness. As she spoke, Gabriel listened intently, his usual confident demeanor softening. When Margaret finished, there was a brief pause before Gabriel replied, "It sounds like this young man is something special." "He is," Margaret said firmly. "He reminded me of you when you were his age, full of potential but carrying so much weight on his shoulders." Gabriel chuckled softly. "I didn't fix any flat tires in the rain, though," he teased, but his voice carried a note of seriousness. "What's his name?" "Jordan," Margaret answered. "Jordan Hale. I didn't ask for much else. He didn't want anything in return, but Gabriel, you have to meet him. There's something about him that feels important." Gabriel leaned back in his chair, considering her words. His mother's instincts were rarely wrong. "All right," he said, his mind already spinning with ideas. "Let me see what I can do." And with that, a search began, one that would soon set off a chain of events Jordan couldn't have imagined. The storm had painted a vivid memory in Margaret Bronson's mind, replaying over and over as she sipped her coffee the following morning. The young man, Jordan Hale, had been a fleeting presence in her life, but his act of kindness lingered. Gabriel Bronson, her son, was intrigued by her story, and the determination in his mother's voice was enough to spark an idea. While Gabriel began quietly orchestrating a search for the boy, Margaret found herself reflecting on the encounter, piecing together the moments when their lives had briefly intersected. The night before, as Jordan knelt in the cold rain to inspect the Cybertruck's flat tire, Margaret had tried to focus on the practicalities. Yet her attention kept returning to the boy himself. Despite the storm, his demeanor was calm and steady, a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding them. "You seem to know what you're doing," Margaret had said, her voice tentative as she watched him retrieve tools from his bike's worn saddlebag. Jordan had laughed lightly, shaking rain from his hair. "I fixed a lot of bikes and a few cars here and there. This one's a bit fancier," he admitted, gesturing at the futuristic vehicle. "But a flat tire is a flat tire." Margaret had smiled at his humility. "How old are you?" she asked after a pause, her curiosity getting the better of her. 20, he replied, his hands working with practiced precision. "Been fixing things for as long as I can remember. My dad used to be a mechanic before he got hurt." Margaret nodded, sensing there was more to the story but not wanting to pry. "And what about now? Are you in school?" Jordan hesitated. "I'm working, mostly odd jobs, dishwashing, fixing things for neighbors. School?" He trailed off, his voice tinged with something she couldn't quite place. Hope, perhaps, but buried beneath layers of reality. "College isn't really in the cards right now." Margaret's chest tightened. "What would you study if it were?" she asked, her voice softer now. "Engineering," he said, the word carrying an unexpected spark of energy. "I've always loved figuring out how things work. Machines, circuits, anything mechanical. It's like solving puzzles. But tuition costs a fortune, so I'm just taking things day by day." For a moment, there was only the sound of the rain and Jordan's hands working against the Cybertruck's sleek surface. Margaret wanted to say something, to offer encouragement, but she held back. She had learned long ago that empty platitudes often did more harm than good. "You're remarkably skilled," she said instead. "Not everyone would know how to patch a tire like this." Jordan smiled faintly, glancing at her briefly. "It's nothing special," he said modestly. "Just something I picked up along the way. My mom always says, if you can fix something, you don't have to buy a new one. It's how we've made it work all these years." Margaret couldn't help but admire the young man. His hands were calloused, his clothes worn, but his spirit was undeniably bright. Here was someone who had every reason to be resentful of the world, yet chose to help a stranger in the pouring rain. As Jordan finished the repair, He stood and wiped his hands on his jeans. "That should hold until you get it checked properly," he said, gesturing toward the tire. Margaret reached into her purse, pulling out a folded bill. "Take this, please. It's the least I can do." Jordan hesitated, his eyes darting between the money and Margaret's sincere expression. Finally, he shook his head. "Thank you, but I can't take it," he said firmly. "I didn't do this for money." His words left her momentarily speechless. In a world that often seemed driven by self-interest, here was a young man whose kindness came with no strings attached. She tucked the money back into her purse, smiling warmly. "You have a good heart, Jordan," she said. "The world needs more people like you." Jordan nodded slightly, retrieving his bike from where it leaned against the lamppost. "Take care, ma'am," he said simply, mounting the bicycle. As he pedaled away, Margaret stood beside her car, the rain easing into a light drizzle. She watched until his silhouette disappeared into the distance, her thoughts swirling. The encounter had been brief, but it had left an indelible mark on her. Back in the present, Margaret placed her coffee mug down and reached for her phone. Gabriel's voice echoed in her mind from their earlier call. "Let me see what I can do." Her son was resourceful, a man of action, and she knew he wouldn't let this go. But even so, she couldn't help but wonder, would Jordan's quiet kindness ever find its way back to him? Margaret sat at her kitchen table the following morning, sunlight streaming through the windows as the storm clouds finally gave way to a bright Texas morning. The warmth of the day felt like a stark contrast to the cold, wet night before. Yet her thoughts were still with the young man who had so selflessly helped her. She couldn't shake the memory of his quiet resolve, his humility, and the glimmer of hope in his voice when he spoke about his dream of becoming an engineer. After her call with Gabriel earlier, she felt a spark of determination. Her son had promised to do what he could to find Jordan, but Margaret couldn't help feeling that she had a role to play as well. She wasn't sure why the encounter had affected her so deeply. Perhaps it was because Jordan reminded her of the students she had taught during her decades as a teacher. Some of them had the same quiet resilience, the same willingness to work hard despite the odds stacked against them. She reached for her notebook, flipping through its pages until she found a clean one. Pulling out a pen, she began jotting down everything she could remember about Jordan: his name, his age, the way he'd spoken about his family. Her handwriting was steady, though her thoughts swirled with a mix of urgency and purpose. The night before, as he had patched the Cybertruck's tire, Jordan had shared small glimpses of his life. A life filled with challenges, but also hope. Margaret remembered his words clearly. "I want to build things that make life easier for people, machines, technology, things that solve problems." It wasn't just the content of his dream that had struck her, but the way he'd said it, with an almost childlike excitement, even in the face of uncertainty. He hadn't spoken with bitterness or self-pity. Instead, he had seemed genuinely optimistic, as though the possibility of achieving that dream was enough to keep him moving forward. Margaret sighed, setting down her pen. In all her years as an educator, she had seen countless young people with potential like Jordan's. Some had been fortunate enough to find the resources and opportunities to succeed. Others, despite their best efforts, had been swallowed by circumstances beyond their control. She refused to let that happen to Jordan. Margaret rose from her chair and paced the room, her thoughts growing more focused with each step. She didn't know much about him, but she knew enough to believe in him. His kindness, his work ethic, his unwavering optimism, those were the traits that couldn't be taught. They were innate, and they deserved recognition. Reaching for her phone, Margaret dialed Gabriel once more. He answered on the second ring, his voice still carrying the warm familiarity of their earlier call. "Mom," he said with a chuckle, "you're calling again already? Is everything all right?" "Yes, everything's fine," Margaret replied, though her tone was firm. "I've been thinking more about Jordan." Gabriel's voice softened. "You really care about this, don't you?" "I do," Margaret said without hesitation. "You didn't meet him, Gabriel. You didn't see the way he carried himself, the way he spoke about his family and his dreams. He's the kind of person who doesn't come along often. Someone who gives without expecting anything in return. He deserves a chance." Gabriel was silent for a moment, and Margaret could imagine him leaning back in his chair, weighing her words. Finally, he spoke. "All right," he said. "Let's make this happen. I'll start reaching out to my team today. We'll find him." Margaret felt a wave of relief, but also a renewed sense of determination. "Thank you, Gabriel," she said softly. As the call ended, Margaret sat back down at the table, her hands resting on the notebook. She felt hopeful but also anxious. There were so many questions that remained unanswered. Would they find him? Would he even accept their help if they did? Still, one thing was certain. Margaret wasn't going to forget Jordan Hale, and she wasn't going to let the world forget him either. Margaret's words stayed with Gabriel long after their call ended. He had heard the determination in her voice and understood the significance of what she was asking. It wasn't often that his mother, a woman known for her pragmatism, became so passionate about someone she had just met. But Gabriel trusted her judgment. She had an uncanny ability to see the potential in people, and this time it was clear she had seen something extraordinary in Jordan Hale. Sitting in his sleek office at the Bronson Tech headquarters in Austin, Gabriel leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. The story of a young man repairing a Cybertruck in the pouring rain while asking for nothing in return was unusual enough to warrant attention. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized this wasn't just about a flat tire. It was about character. Jordan sounded like someone who embodied the values Gabriel held dear: integrity, perseverance, and the desire to make a difference. He pressed a button on his desk phone. Moments later, his assistant Claire appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. "You called?" she asked, raising an eyebrow at the unusually contemplative expression on Gabriel's face. "Yes," Gabriel said, sitting up. "I need your help tracking someone down." Claire tilted her head, intrigued. "This sounds different from the usual projects." "It is," Gabriel replied. "This is personal. My mother met a young man last night, Jordan Hale. She says he's exceptional, and I trust her. I need to find him." Claire nodded, her fingers already tapping away on the tablet. "What details do we have?" Gabriel recounted everything Margaret had told him. Jordan's name, his approximate age, the location where they had met, and the fact that he'd been riding a bicycle. It wasn't much to go on, but Claire had tackled more challenging tasks before. "We can start with traffic camera footage from the area," Claire suggested. "If the Cybertruck passed through there, we might catch a glimpse of him." "Good," Gabriel said. "Keep it discreet. I don't want him feeling overwhelmed." Claire left the room with a sense of purpose, and Gabriel leaned forward, clasping his hands together. For someone like Jordan, someone humble and hardworking, a sudden spotlight could feel more like a burden than a blessing. Gabriel wanted to ensure that when they found him, they approached with care. Meanwhile, Jordan was completely unaware of the search unfolding behind the scenes. His day had started like any other. He had fixed a neighbor's leaky faucet before heading to his dishwashing shift at the diner. The small local eatery bustled with the usual lunch rush, and Jordan moved efficiently between stacks of plates and steaming sinks, his mind preoccupied with thoughts of his family's mounting bills. Despite the routine, the memory of the previous night lingered. Helping Margaret had felt like the right thing to do, but Jordan couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't done enough. Her gratitude had been genuine, but he wished he could have done more than patch a tire and send her on her way. By late afternoon, Claire had compiled a preliminary report. She entered Gabriel's office, a triumphant smile on her face. "We found something," she announced, holding up her tablet. "Traffic cameras caught a cyclist near the Cybertruck's location last night. He matches the description." Gabriel's eyes lit up. "That's a good start. Do we have anything else?" Claire nodded. "I cross-referenced social media posts from the area. A local resident mentioned seeing a young man helping a woman with a flat tire in the storm. It's not much, but it lines up." Gabriel stood, energized by the progress. "Let's take it further. Reach out to community groups in that neighborhood. Someone must know him." Over the next few days, the search intensified. Gabriel's team contacted local businesses, including the diner where Jordan worked, and pieced together more details about his life. They learned about his mother, Lisa, a dedicated nurse, and his younger sister, Emma, a bright student with dreams of her own. The more Gabriel discovered, the more he admired Jordan's quiet resilience. Finally, one afternoon, Claire walked into Gabriel's office with a confident smile. "We found him," she said. "He lives in East Austin, not far from here. Should I arrange a meeting?" Gabriel paused, considering the best approach. "No," he said thoughtfully. "I'll go myself. If what my mom said about him is true, he deserves a personal visit." As Claire left to make the necessary arrangements, Gabriel felt a sense of anticipation. Meeting Jordan wasn't just about repaying a kindness. It was about acknowledging someone whose actions reflected a rare and genuine goodness. Gabriel didn't know exactly what would come of it, but he was certain of one thing. This meeting had the potential to change not just Jordan's life, but his own as well. Gabriel Bronson's team had successfully located Jordan Hale, and plans were quietly underway for a personal visit. Gabriel wanted to approach the young man with respect and care, ensuring he didn't overwhelm him. But while Gabriel's world buzzed with high-tech efficiency and quiet anticipation, Jordan's life unfolded in a completely different rhythm. The Hale household sat on a quiet, weathered street in East Austin. It was a modest home, with peeling paint on the shutters and a yard that bore the signs of a family too busy to tend to it. The porch light flickered every few seconds, an old bulb overdue for replacement. Inside, the air was filled with the warm aroma of dinner, simple but hearty, a small reprieve from the daily grind. Jordan had just come home from a long shift at the diner, his shoulders sore and his hands still damp from hours spent washing dishes. His mother, Lisa Hale, greeted him from the kitchen, where she was preparing a pot of chicken soup. Dressed in her nursing scrubs, she looked as tired as Jordan felt, but her face lit up when she saw him. "Long day?" Lisa asked, setting a steaming bowl on the table. Jordan shrugged and managed a small smile. "Same as always. The faucet at Mrs. Callahan's place is finally fixed, though." Lisa chuckled softly, wiping her hands on a towel as she joined him at the table. "You're a lifesaver, you know that? I don't know how we'd manage without you." Jordan shook his head, brushing off the compliment. "You're the real lifesaver, Mom. All those hours you work, I don't know how you do it." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of laughter coming from the small living room. Jordan's younger sister, Emma, sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by textbooks and a calculator. She was working on a math problem, but had paused to watch a video on her tablet, giggling at a scene she found amusing. At 15, Emma was bright and ambitious, with dreams of becoming a doctor. Jordan often thought of her as the heart of their family, her optimism a counterbalance to the weight he and Lisa carried. After dinner, Jordan retreated to a corner of the living room where a makeshift workbench was set up. It was cluttered with tools, wires, and old appliances that Jordan had salvaged from neighbors. Tonight he was repairing a toaster for Mrs. Gomez down the street. The rhythmic sound of the rain the previous night still played in his mind, along with the memory of Margaret Bronson. Jordan couldn't help but wonder how she was doing. Had the patch on her tire held? Did she make it home safely? He shook his head, telling himself it didn't matter. He had done what he could, and that was enough. Yet a part of him wished he could have done more. "What you working on?" Emma's voice broke his train of thought. She had wandered over, curious as always. "Just fixing this toaster," Jordan replied, holding up a screwdriver. "Mrs. Gomez said it stopped working last week." Emma leaned on the edge of the table, watching him intently. "You're really good at this stuff, you know? You could build anything if you had the chance." Jordan smiled faintly, but his reply was tinged with realism. "Maybe. But building something takes more than just skill, Emma. It takes resources, time, money, education." She frowned, her brows furrowing in determination. "You'll get there, Jordan. I know you will. You've got that spark." Jordan paused, looking at his sister. Her belief in him was unwavering, and it reminded him of why he worked so hard. He wanted her to have every opportunity he had missed, every chance to pursue her dreams without the weight of their family's struggles holding her back. Later that night, as the house grew quiet, Jordan sat alone at the kitchen table, a cup of tea in his hands. He allowed himself a rare moment of reflection, thinking about his life, the long hours, the unfulfilled dreams, and the constant balancing act between survival and ambition. He thought of his father, who had once been a skilled mechanic before an injury forced him to stop working full-time. It was his father who had first taught Jordan how to use a wrench, how to solve problems with his hands. Though the injury had left him withdrawn, Jordan often felt his presence in the skills he used every day. But it was his mother's resilience that inspired him the most. Lisa Hale, with her tired eyes and unwavering determination, had taught him that even when the odds were against you, there was always a way forward. That belief had carried him through every difficult moment, and it was what had driven him to stop and help Margaret Bronson on that stormy night. Jordan sighed, his thoughts drifting back to that moment. He had no idea that the small act of kindness he'd extended to a stranger would soon ripple through his life in ways he couldn't imagine. For now, though, his focus remained on the small things: the toaster on his workbench, the bills that needed paying, and the quiet hope that somehow someday his hard work would lead to something greater. The days following Jordan's encounter with Margaret Bronson unfolded as they always did, a cycle of hard work and quiet determination. Between shifts at the diner, odd repair jobs for neighbors, and helping his family at home, there was little time for anything else. But Margaret's words, her warmth and sincerity, lingered with him. Her gratitude had felt different, as though it carried a weight he couldn't quite name. On a crisp afternoon, Jordan was seated at his makeshift workbench in the corner of the living room. The sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows over the cluttered surface covered with screws, wires, and an old alarm clock he was repairing for a neighbor. His sister Emma sat nearby, scribbling in her notebook as she worked on her school assignments. The house was quiet, save for the occasional clink of metal and the soft hum of conversation from the television in the background. As Jordan tested the clock's repaired mechanism, the rhythmic ticking brought a rare sense of satisfaction. Fixing things had always been more than just a task for him. It was a way to bring order to the chaos of life. Yet, even as he worked, a nagging thought lingered in the back of his mind. How would he ever move beyond these small, temporary fixes to something bigger, something lasting? His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Jordan paused, exchanging a curious glance with Emma, who had stopped writing mid-sentence. "I'll get it," he said, setting the clock down carefully. Jordan wiped his hands on his jeans as he walked to the door, his heart beating slightly faster than usual. It wasn't often that they had unexpected visitors, and he couldn't imagine who it might be. When he opened the door, the sight before him left him momentarily speechless. Standing on the worn front porch was a man whose presence was unmistakable. Gabriel Bronson, with his neatly pressed blazer and calm but commanding demeanor, smiled warmly. Behind him stood Margaret, her expression a mix of kindness and quiet pride. "Jordan Hale?" Gabriel asked, extending his hand. Jordan blinked, his mind racing to process what was happening. Yes, that's me," he replied, shaking Gabriel's hand hesitantly. Margaret stepped forward, her smile widening. "Hello again, Jordan," she said warmly. "I hope you don't mind us stopping by unannounced." "Of course not," Jordan said, though his voice betrayed his nervousness. "Is everything all right?" Gabriel chuckled softly. "More than all right," he said. "My mother has been telling me all about you, the young man who stopped in the rain to help her when no one else would." Jordan glanced at Margaret, his cheeks flushing slightly. "I was just doing what anyone would do," he said modestly. Margaret shook her head. "No, Jordan. What you did was extraordinary, and my son here wanted to meet you in person because of it." Gabriel nodded, his expression sincere. "She's right. The way she describes it, you're someone who doesn't just talk about doing the right thing. You live it. That's rare, and it's something I admire." By now, Lisa and Emma had joined them in the doorway, their expressions a mix of curiosity and awe. Lisa, still in her nursing scrubs, looked from Gabriel to Margaret, then back to Jordan. "Is everything okay?" she asked cautiously. Gabriel smiled at her warmly. "More than okay. We're here to talk about Jordan's future." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Jordan felt his chest tighten, a mixture of hope and disbelief swelling inside him. "My future?" he echoed, his voice barely above a whisper. Margaret placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Yes, Jordan, you deserve a chance to pursue your dreams, and we want to help make that happen." Jordan stood frozen in the doorway, his thoughts a whirlwind of disbelief and uncertainty. Gabriel's words, "We're here to talk about your future," echoed in his mind. For someone like Jordan, whose life had been defined by hard work and limited opportunities, the idea of someone offering help felt both surreal and intimidating. Lisa Hale, ever protective of her family, was the first to break the silence. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, her voice steady but cautious. Gabriel smiled reassuringly. "I mean exactly what I said. My mother told me about how Jordan helped her, how he refused any payment and shared his dream of becoming an engineer. That kind of character, kindness, integrity, and a willingness to work hard, deserves to be recognized." Jordan glanced at Margaret, who nodded encouragingly. "You inspired me, Jordan," she said softly. "You reminded me of the kind of hope and determination we all need more of in this world." Gabriel gestured toward the living room. "Can we sit down? I'd like to explain everything." Lisa nodded hesitantly, ushering them inside. The small living room felt even smaller with the presence of their unexpected guests. Emma perched on the edge of the couch, her eyes wide with curiosity, while Jordan took a seat next to his mother, his posture tense but attentive. Gabriel leaned forward slightly, his tone shifting to one of earnest sincerity. "Jordan, I've built my career on finding solutions, whether it's through technology, innovation, or helping people achieve their potential. When my mother told me about you, I knew I wanted to do something. You have the kind of drive and determination that can't be taught, and I believe in giving people like you the opportunities they deserve." Jordan stared at him, still struggling to process the weight of Gabriel's words. "But why me?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. I'm just trying to get by." "That's exactly why," Gabriel replied. "You're not just getting by. You're taking every challenge life throws at you and pushing through it. That takes strength, and it's the kind of strength that changes lives. Not just yours, but the lives of the people you'll inspire and help along the way." Jordan felt his throat tighten, his emotions threatening to surface. He had spent so long convincing himself that his dreams were out of reach, that hearing someone validate them was almost too much to bear. Margaret reached out, placing a comforting hand on his. "We want to help, Jordan," she said gently. "My son has the resources to give you the chance you deserve, a chance to go to college, to study engineering, to build the future you dream of." Gabriel nodded. "I'd like to offer you a full scholarship to the engineering program of your choice. Tuition, living expenses, everything. And beyond that, I'd like to invite you to intern at one of my companies, where you can gain real-world experience and mentorship." The room fell silent, the gravity of the offer sinking in. Lisa looked at her son, her eyes brimming with pride and disbelief. Emma was beaming, her smile infectious as she whispered, "Jordan, this is it. This is your chance." But Jordan hesitated. His mind raced with questions. Was he ready for something like this? Could he leave his family behind even temporarily? What if he failed? I don't know what to say," he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Gabriel leaned back slightly, giving Jordan space to process. "You don't have to decide right now," he said. "Take some time to think it over. Talk to your family, weigh your options. All I ask is that you believe in yourself as much as we believe in you." Margaret squeezed Jordan's hand gently. "You have a gift, Jordan," she said. "Don't let doubt hold you back. You've already proven what you're capable of. You just need to take the next step." Jordan's gaze shifted to his mother, who gave him a tearful nod. "You've earned this," she said softly. "It's your time." For the first time in years, Jordan allowed himself to imagine what might be possible. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time it felt achievable. With a deep breath, he looked back at Gabriel and Margaret, determination flickering in his eyes. "I'll think about it," he said, his voice steady now. "But thank you for believing in me." Jordan spent the next few days wrestling with the offer Gabriel had extended. His family encouraged him to take the opportunity, but doubt and fear lingered in his mind. Could he really step into a world so far removed from his own? What would happen to his family while he was gone? He found himself going about his usual routines with those questions hanging over him like a shadow. At the diner, word of the unexpected visitors at the Hale household had already begun to spread. A regular customer, Mrs. Callahan, had overheard bits of conversation and couldn't help but ask Jordan about it. "Jordan," she said, her voice warm but curious, "I heard someone important stopped by your place the other day. Something about an opportunity?" Jordan hesitated, unsure of how much to share. "Yeah, someone came by," he said simply. "They offered to help me go to college." Mrs. Callahan's face lit up. "That's incredible, sweetheart. You deserve it. You've been helping everyone around here for as long as I can remember." Her words struck a chord with Jordan. It wasn't the first time someone had told him he deserved something better, but hearing it now, in the context of a real opportunity, felt different. It was as if the community had always believed in him, even when he struggled to believe in himself. News of Gabriel Bronson's visit spread quickly, and soon, Jordan found himself the center of quiet admiration among his neighbors. People he had helped over the years began sharing their stories, how Jordan had fixed their broken appliances, shoveled snow from their driveways, or simply stopped to lend a listening ear. It wasn't just about the tasks he had done, it was about the way he had done them, with patience, kindness, and no expectation of anything in return. For Jordan, these conversations were humbling. He had always seen himself as just another person trying to get by, but hearing how others viewed him made him realize the impact of his actions, no matter how small they seemed at the time. One evening, Jordan was repairing an old lawnmower for Mr. Gomez when the older man sat down beside him on the porch. The fading sunlight cast a warm glow over the quiet street, and Mr. Gomez's voice carried a tone of quiet wisdom. "Jordan," he said, "I've seen a lot of young people come and go in this neighborhood, but you're different. You've got something special, a way of lifting others up even when you're carrying the weight of the world on your own shoulders." Jordan looked up, surprised. "I just do what needs to be done," he said, shrugging. "That's exactly what makes you special," Mr. Gomez replied. "You don't do it for recognition or reward, but now that it's your turn, don't be afraid to take what's being offered. You've earned it." Those words stayed with Jordan as he finished the repair and walked home that night. His neighborhood, his community, had shaped him in ways he hadn't fully understood until now. And if he accepted Gabriel's offer, maybe he could find a way to give back even more. The next day, Lisa Hale found herself receiving congratulations at the hospital where she worked. Her co-workers, who had always admired her resilience, now saw her as the mother of a young man who was about to step into something extraordinary. Even Emma at school found herself the subject of admiration from her peers. Jordan's story rippled through the community, inspiring not just pride, but also a renewed sense of hope. Parents encouraged their children to work hard. Teachers used Jordan's journey as an example in their lessons, and neighbors began supporting one another in small but meaningful ways. But the most profound impact was on Jordan himself. The outpouring of support helped him see his worth in a new light. For so long, he had focused on surviving, on making it through each day. Now, for the first time, he allowed himself to think about thriving, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever believed in him. As he sat at the kitchen table that evening, surrounded by his family, Jordan finally spoke the words that had been sitting in his heart. "I'm going to do it," he said, his voice steady. "I'm going to take the scholarship." Lisa's eyes filled with tears, and Emma let out an excited cheer, rushing to hug her brother. The moment was filled with a quiet joy, a sense of triumph that felt earned. Jordan still didn't know what the future would hold, but he knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't forget where he came from, or the people who had helped him get there. And in that resolve, he found the strength to embrace the opportunity ahead. Jordan's decision to accept the scholarship marked a turning point, not just for him, but for everyone around him. His family, his neighbors, even those who had only heard about his story, began to see the ripple effect of what one act of kindness could achieve. As the weeks passed, preparations for his next chapter moved quickly. Gabriel's team ensured that everything was in place for Jordan's transition to college, from tuition to housing, even a small stipend to cover his expenses. The morning of his departure was both exhilarating and bittersweet. Jordan stood outside the Hale home, a few bags packed neatly at his feet. The air was crisp, the sky painted with soft hues of sunrise. His mother, Lisa, stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. Emma clutched his arm, trying to mask her sadness with an encouraging smile. "You're going to do amazing things, Jordan," Lisa said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "But no matter how far you go, this will always be your home." Jordan nodded, his heart heavy yet hopeful. "I won't forget where I came from," he said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "Everything I do, I'll do for us." A sleek black car pulled up to the curb, sent by Gabriel to take Jordan to his new college campus. As he loaded his bags into the trunk, he took one last look at the house, the flickering porch light, the peeling paint, the yard that had seen so many memories. It wasn't much, but it was home. The ride to the campus was surreal. Jordan had never traveled far from his neighborhood, and now he was heading to a prestigious university where students from all over the country came to chase their dreams. The campus itself was a sight to behold: sprawling lawns, modern buildings, and a palpable sense of ambition in the air. Gabriel had arranged for a guide to meet Jordan upon his arrival. A young woman named Nadia, a junior in the engineering program, greeted him warmly. "You must be Jordan," she said, extending her hand. "Welcome to your new home." Jordan followed her through the bustling campus, taking in the sights and sounds of his new environment. Students hurried between classes, groups gathered under trees to study, and the hum of conversation filled the air. It was overwhelming but exhilarating. Nadia led him to his dorm, a modest but comfortable space with a view of the campus courtyard. As he unpacked his bags, Jordan felt a mix of emotions: nervousness, excitement, and an undeniable sense of responsibility. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who had believed in him, supported him, and seen his potential when he couldn't. That evening, as the campus settled into a quiet rhythm, Jordan found himself walking through the engineering building, his hands tucked into his pockets. The halls were lined with posters of groundbreaking projects, photos of students working on cutting-edge innovations. For the first time, the reality of his new path truly sank in. He paused in front of a glass display case filled with student projects, intricately designed prototypes, robotics, and inventions that seemed to bridge the gap between imagination and reality. Jordan couldn't help but smile as he thought of the tools and appliances he had repaired back home. This was a new chapter, but it felt like a natural extension of everything he had been building toward his entire life. As he stood there, a single thought filled his mind. This is just the beginning. Jordan's first week at the university was a whirlwind of introductions, orientations, and late-night study sessions. Though intimidating at first, he quickly found his footing, diving into the coursework with the same determination that had carried him through so many challenges back home. His professors noticed his curiosity and work ethic, and his peers respected his quiet resilience. One afternoon, as Jordan sat in a lecture on mechanical design, his phone buzzed with a text from Gabriel. It was an invitation. "Come to the city tomorrow. I want to show you something." Jordan's heart raced. He hadn't seen Gabriel since that fateful day at his house, and the invitation filled him with both excitement and curiosity. The next day, a car arrived to take Jordan into the city. The drive was quiet, the sprawling campus eventually giving way to Austin's bustling streets. As the car pulled up to a sleek glass-covered building, Jordan immediately recognized it as one of Gabriel's tech offices. The entrance was marked by a towering sign, "Bronson Innovations." Gabriel greeted him in the lobby, his handshake warm and his demeanor as approachable as ever. "Jordan," he said with a smile, "I've been looking forward to this. Come on, I have something I think you'll love." He led Jordan through the building, the halls buzzing with engineers, designers, and programmers deep in collaboration. The energy was electric, and Jordan couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. This was where ideas became reality, where visions turned into tangible innovations. Gabriel stopped outside a set of double doors, swiping a card to unlock them. "Welcome to our prototype lab," he said as the door slid open. Jordan stepped inside and his breath caught. The room was filled with advanced machinery, Half-built robots and intricate blueprints scattered across workbenches. Engineers worked methodically, their focus unwavering as they tested new designs. One wall was lined with futuristic prototypes, drones, robotic arms, and vehicles that seemed plucked from science fiction. Gabriel gestured toward a corner where a sleek, partially assembled electric vehicle sat on a platform. "This," he said, "is our latest project. We're designing an autonomous utility vehicle for rural areas, something affordable and adaptable. And Jordan, I'd like you to work with us on it." Jordan's eyes widened in disbelief. "Me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Gabriel nodded. "You have a unique perspective. You've spent your life fixing things with limited resources, finding creative solutions. That's exactly what we need. Someone who understands practicality and ingenuity. This isn't just about learning from us. It's about contributing." For a moment, Jordan couldn't speak. He walked closer to the vehicle, his fingers brushing against the smooth metal. This wasn't a toaster or a bicycle. This was something that could change lives, solve real problems. I don't know what to say," he finally admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "Say yes," Gabriel said simply, his tone encouraging but firm. "You've already shown us what you're capable of. Now it's time to take the next step." Jordan nodded slowly, a small smile breaking across his face. "Yes," he said. "I'd love to." As the tour continued, Gabriel introduced Jordan to the engineers and designers who would become his teammates. They welcomed him warmly, impressed by the story Gabriel shared of Jordan's journey. By the end of the day, Jordan felt not like an outsider, but like someone who belonged, a part of something bigger than himself. As he left the building that evening, the sun dipping below the horizon, Jordan couldn't stop smiling. The opportunities ahead felt vast and full of promise. For the first time, he wasn't just dreaming about the future. He was stepping into it. Jordan's new role at Bronson Innovations felt like stepping into a new world. A world that challenged him at every turn, but also inspired him in ways he hadn't thought possible. Each day in the prototype lab was filled with learning, collaboration, and moments of self-doubt. But through every obstacle, Jordan found a quiet resolve to push forward. His first few weeks on the team were spent shadowing engineers, soaking up their knowledge and learning the intricacies of advanced design. It wasn't easy. Jordan often found himself questioning whether he truly belonged among such brilliant minds. The technical jargon, the cutting-edge software, and the fast-paced environment all seemed overwhelming. But then, he would remember the words of his mother. "You've earned this. It's your time." One evening, as the lab emptied and the hum of machinery quieted, Jordan stayed behind, tinkering with a component for the autonomous utility vehicle. He had been tasked with redesigning the vehicle's suspension system to handle rugged terrain, a daunting challenge for someone still learning the ropes. His workbench was cluttered with sketches, tools, and failed prototypes, but his determination was unshaken. Gabriel found him there, hunched over his work, deep in concentration. "Burning the midnight oil?" Gabriel asked, his tone light but supportive. Jordan looked up, startled, then smiled sheepishly. "Just trying to get it right." Gabriel stepped closer, glancing at the scattered notes. "You're doing more than trying, Jordan. You're making progress. Don't forget, trial and error is part of the process." Jordan nodded, appreciating the encouragement. "It just feels like there's so much I don't know yet." "That's the beauty of it," Gabriel replied. "Every challenge you face is an opportunity to grow, and trust me, you're already impressing people around here." As the weeks turned into months, Jordan began to find his rhythm. The initial fear of failure was replaced by a growing confidence in his abilities. His unique perspective, rooted in years of problem-solving with limited resources, proved invaluable to the team. While others approached challenges with theoretical knowledge, Jordan brought practical solutions that often surprised even the most experienced engineers. One day during a team meeting, the project lead presented a design issue that had stalled progress. The vehicle's navigation system struggled to adapt to unpredictable environments, and weeks of testing had failed to yield a solution. As the team debated, Jordan hesitated, then spoke up. "What if we use modular sensors?" he suggested, his voice steady but unsure. If one sensor fails, the others can adapt and compensate, keeping the system functional. The room fell silent, and for a moment, Jordan wondered if he had overstepped. But then the lead engineer nodded thoughtfully. "That's actually a great idea," he said. "Let's explore it." The breakthrough not only pushed the project forward, but also cemented Jordan's place on the team. His colleagues began seeking his input more frequently, and he found himself growing into the role with every success. Despite his progress, Jordan faced personal challenges as well. Balancing his work at Bronson Innovations with his studies was no small feat. Late nights in the lab often blurred into early mornings in the classroom, leaving him exhausted but fulfilled. He missed his family deeply, their phone calls and video chats a lifeline to the world he had left behind. Lisa and Emma were his biggest cheerleaders, their voices filled with pride every time they spoke. "You're doing amazing, Jordan," Lisa would say. "We're so proud of you." Those words kept him grounded, reminding him of why he had started this journey in the first place. He wasn't just chasing his own dreams. He was paving the way for a better future for his family and his community. By the end of the semester, Jordan's contributions to the autonomous utility vehicle project had garnered significant attention within Bronson Innovations. Gabriel himself praised Jordan during a company-wide meeting, highlighting his resourcefulness and dedication. For the first time, Jordan felt not just like a student or a contributor, but like a true innovator. As he walked home that evening, the weight of his journey hit him. Every challenge, every late night, every moment of doubt had led to this, a life where he could see the impact of his work and feel the pride of knowing he was on the right path. This is only the beginning, he thought, and for the first time he truly believed it. Jordan's success at Bronson Innovations and his growing confidence in the classroom marked a new chapter in his life. But no matter how far he progressed, he remained deeply connected to the community and the people who had shaped him. He often reflected on the lessons his mother had instilled in him: kindness, humility, and the importance of lifting others as you rise. One Friday afternoon, as Jordan wrapped up a meeting about the autonomous utility vehicle project, Gabriel approached him with a smile. "Jordan," he said, "we've been thinking about ways to involve the community in our work. Given your roots and what you bring to the team, I thought you might have some ideas." Jordan's eyes lit up. He had often dreamed of creating opportunities for others in his neighborhood, the way Gabriel and Margaret had done for him. "I'd like to start a mentorship program," he said without hesitation. "There's so many kids back home who don't even know what's possible for them. If we could show them what's out there, maybe we could inspire them the way you inspired me." Gabriel nodded, clearly impressed. "I think that's a brilliant idea. Let's make it happen." The next few weeks were a flurry of activity. With Gabriel's resources and Jordan's insight, they launched the Hail Horizons initiative, a program designed to connect underprivileged youth with mentors in technology, engineering, and innovation. The initiative included hands-on workshops, guest speakers, and tours of Bronson Innovations to give students a glimpse into what their futures could hold. Jordan's first trip back to East Austin as part of the program was deeply emotional. Walking into his old neighborhood with a team of engineers and educators felt surreal, but seeing the faces of the kids who gathered for the workshop reminded him of why he had started this journey. The event was held at the local community center, where Jordan had spent countless afternoons as a kid. Standing at the front of the room, he took a deep breath before addressing the crowd. "Growing up here," he began, "I never thought I'd end up where I am today. But what I've learned is that it's not about where you start. It's about where you choose to go. And no matter how hard things get, there's always a way forward." As he spoke, he noticed Emma in the back of the room, beaming with pride. Lisa stood beside her, wiping tears from her eyes. For them, seeing Jordan in this role, giving back to the community that had shaped him, was a moment of profound joy. The workshops were a huge success. Jordan guided the kids through hands-on activities, teaching them how to build simple machines and encouraging them to ask questions. One boy, no older than 10, tugged on Jordan's sleeve at the end of the day. "Mr. Hale," he said shyly, "do you think I could be an engineer one day?" Jordan crouched down to meet his eyes, smiling. "I don't think you can," he said. And when you're ready, I'll be here to help you. That evening, as Jordan packed up the materials from the workshop, Margaret approached him. She had traveled from her home to see the program in action and couldn't hide her pride. "You've done something truly remarkable here," she said. "These kids will remember this day for the rest of their lives." Jordan shook his head humbly. "It's all because of you and Gabriel. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." Margaret smiled. "And now you're passing that belief on to others. That's what makes it all worthwhile." As the night drew to a close, Jordan returned home to his family's house, sitting on the porch with Lisa and Emma. The air was cool, the stars bright above them. "You've come so far," Lisa said, her voice filled with pride. "But what I love most is that you've never forgotten where you came from." Jordan looked out at the street where he had spent so many years, his heart full of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without this place," he said softly, "and I'll never stop giving back." For the first time in his life, Jordan felt a sense of balance between where he had been and where he was going. He didn't just see a future for himself anymore. He saw a future for his community, one filled with opportunity, hope, and the ripple effects of kindness. The success of the Hail Horizons initiative marked a new chapter, not just for Jordan, but for everyone who had been part of his journey. For months, the program flourished, drawing students from underserved communities who found themselves inspired by Jordan's story and the opportunities he helped create. But as much as he gave to others, Jordan couldn't shake the feeling that his work had only just begun. One afternoon, as Jordan walked through the familiar streets of East Austin, he found himself returning to the spot where he had first met Margaret Bronson. The memories of that stormy night were vivid, and he marveled at how one small act of kindness had set his life on an entirely new course. The street looked different now, brighter somehow, as though it too had transformed with time. Margaret had often said that life was a series of interconnected moments, and Jordan understood that better than ever. He thought about how Gabriel's mentorship had opened doors for him, how his mother's resilience had shaped his character, and how his sister's unwavering belief had fueled his drive. All of it had led him here, standing on the roadside where his journey had begun. A honk startled him from his thoughts, and he turned to see a familiar Cybertruck pulling up beside him. The window rolled down, and Margaret leaned out with a warm smile. "Fancy meeting you here," she said, her voice carrying a hint of humor. Jordan laughed. "It feels like yesterday," he replied, stepping closer to the vehicle. Margaret parked and joined him on the sidewalk, her gaze sweeping over the area. "It's amazing, isn't it? How much can change in such a short time?" Jordan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about that a lot. How one moment, one decision, can ripple out and affect so many lives." Margaret placed a hand on his shoulder, her eyes filled with pride. "You're proof of that, Jordan. And now, you're creating ripples of your own." The two of them walked a short distance, their conversation light but meaningful. Margaret shared stories of the students she had met through Hail Horizons, while Jordan spoke of his plans to expand the program to other cities. His vision had grown, just as his confidence had. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the street, Jordan paused and turned to Margaret. "I never got to properly thank you," he said earnestly, "for believing in me, for seeing something in me that I didn't see in myself." Margaret shook her head, smiling. "You don't need to thank me, Jordan. You've done all of this. You took the chance and ran with it. I just gave you a little push." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, the sounds of the neighborhood filling the air. It wasn't just a street anymore. It was a symbol of change, growth, and the endless possibilities that could come from even the smallest act of kindness. Before parting ways, Margaret handed Jordan a small envelope. "Open this later," she said with a wink. "It's something to remind you that the journey is just as important as the destination." That evening, back in his dorm room, Jordan opened the envelope to find a handwritten note from Margaret. It read, "Kindness changes everything. Keep creating ripples." Alongside the note was a photograph of the two of them from the community center event, surrounded by smiling kids and their parents. Jordan placed the photo on his desk, his heart full of gratitude. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time he felt ready for whatever came next. The story had come full circle, but it was far from over. The photograph Margaret had given him became a daily reminder of the journey that had brought Jordan to where he was now. Placed prominently on his desk, it stood as a testament to the power of kindness, resilience, and the connections that made life meaningful. As the weeks turned into months, Jordan immersed himself in his studies and work at Bronson Innovations, fueled by a sense of purpose that seemed to grow with each passing day. The autonomous utility vehicle project Jordan had been working on reached its final stages. Gabriel called a meeting to unveil the prototype to a group of investors, journalists, and community leaders. Jordan, though still one of the youngest on the team, was asked to present a key feature he had designed: the modular sensor system that adapted to rough terrains. Standing in front of the room filled with influential figures, Jordan took a deep breath. His mind flashed back to his younger self, repairing bicycles in his small neighborhood, dreaming of a future that always felt out of reach. Now he was here, not just as a contributor, but as a leader. As he explained the system with clarity and confidence, the audience nodded with approval. When the presentation concluded, the room erupted into applause, and Gabriel clapped Jordan on the back with pride. "You did great," he said quietly. "This is just the beginning." The launch of the vehicle was a resounding success, but for Jordan, the real triumph came later that evening when Gabriel invited him to dinner. Seated at a quiet restaurant, Gabriel leaned forward and said, "Jordan, I've been watching how you've grown, not just as an engineer, but as a person. You've taken every challenge and turned it into an opportunity. I think it's time we talk about the next step." Jordan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean?" he asked. "I want to offer you a leadership role in the expansion of Bronson Innovations' community outreach programs," Gabriel explained. "You've already proven how impactful Hail Horizons can be. Imagine what we could do if we scaled it to more cities, more communities." Jordan's heart raced. The idea of giving back on such a large scale was daunting but exhilarating. "I'd be honored," he said, his voice steady with determination. In the following months, Jordan worked closely with Gabriel and his team to expand the initiative. They partnered with schools, community centers, and local organizations, creating opportunities for thousands of young people to explore careers in technology and engineering. Jordan traveled frequently, sharing his story and encouraging others to believe in their own potential. One particularly memorable event took place at a high school in a small Texas town. As Jordan addressed the students, he noticed a young boy in the front row, his hands shooting up to ask question after question. After the session, the boy approached Jordan, clutching a notebook filled with sketches of machines and inventions. "Mr. Hale," the boy said shyly, "I want to be like you someday." Jordan crouched to meet the boy's gaze, his smile warm. "Don't be like me," he said. "Be better, take your ideas and run with them. You can change the world if you believe in yourself." Moments like these reminded Jordan why he worked so hard. It wasn't just about his own success. It was about creating ripples of hope and possibility for others. The journey that had started on a stormy night, with a flat tire and a simple act of kindness, had grown into something far greater than he could have ever imagined. Back at home, Lisa and Emma continued to cheer him on, their pride evident in every phone call and visit. His community, once defined by struggle, now thrived with a renewed sense of purpose and possibility. And through it all, Jordan remained grounded, carrying the lessons of his past into every step of his future. Years later, as Jordan stood at the opening of a new innovation center bearing his name, he looked out at the crowd of young faces before him. He thought of Margaret, Gabriel, his mother, and everyone who had believed in him. His voice was steady as he addressed the crowd. "Kindness isn't just an action," he said. "It's a foundation. It's what builds communities, dreams, and futures. It's what brought me here today, and it's what will carry all of us forward." The audience erupted into applause, but Jordan's focus was on the faces of the young people who now stood where he once had. They were the future, and he was determined to give them every opportunity to shine.